Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where we will be setting up a dynamic QR code redirection system using Comnoco as the backend and Supabase as a storage layer. The system essentially saves costs and effort for companies or organizations that want to create QR codes for marketing materials, as it allows a single QR code to dynamically redirect to new destinations without needing to reprint materials. First, head over to the Supabase website and make sure you've created an account and are logged in. I've also gone ahead and created a new project within my Comnoco organization. To do this, you would just need to click on this green New Project button. I've titled my project Test Demos, but feel free to choose a name that works for you. Next, let's enter the project workspace. Once inside, navigate to the menu bar on the left-hand side and click on Table Editor. Once you have entered the table editor, you should be able to see this symbol at the top right-hand corner of your screen, and this is the AI button. This is where you'll paste in the requirements for the table you want to create. In this demo, the table will be called redirects. Once you have pasted in the requirements for your table, click here to run the query. Since the query was run successfully, the table has now appeared with 4 columns, and if we look here, we can see that the redirects table has been created. The next step is to connect Comnoco to Supabase. To do this, navigate to the menu bar on the left-hand side and scroll down to Project Settings, located near the bottom of the menu. Once you have done that, you should be able to find API under the Configuration setting. Here you will see 2 important pieces of information, the project URL and the service role key. For simplicity in this demo, we will be using the service role key. I do want to note that if you choose to use a different key like this one right here, you'll need users to be logged in, and while this is possible to set up in Comnoco, we won't be covering that in the demo today. To begin connecting Comnoco to Supabase, I will be copying the service role key. However, for security reasons, I won't be showing my actual key. Okay, now we are back in Comnoco to create a secret using the key we just copied. I have already entered my workspace and will navigate to Environment Configuration located on the left-hand menu bar. I'm going to name the secret the same as my database in Supabase, which is test demos. Under secret value, I'll paste the key we copied earlier from Supabase. Once that's done in the development environment, we need to repeat the process in the production environment. So we just go here, edit the secret, and make sure you paste in the exact same key again. Now the secret has been created, so we can use it in our database connection for the next step. We will need the project URL from Supabase, so make sure to navigate back there and copy it to your clipboard. Now let's navigate to database connections on the right-hand side and make sure to switch back to the development environment if you haven't already. Now let's create our database connection. We're going to name it the same as the secret we have just previously created. Next, we're going to select Supabase project. Under Supabase project URL, we are going to paste in the project URL. And finally, under the key, we are going to select the secret we just created. Once the database connection is set up in the development environment, we'll head over to the production environment and click Add Database to complete the setup. The next step is to create an API function. I've already created the function collection and named it QR example to keep everything organized. Within this collection, we're going to create a new API function and we're going to name it create add QR, as the purpose of this function is to both create a QR and add it to the database. Right away, we will set up 2 inputs using the text block. The first input is the user key, which will act as a unique identifier for the user, such as a name or a number. And the second one is the QR URL, which we will come back to in a later step. However, these names may change depending on our needs. Now, let's focus on configuring the outputs of our API function. Instead of defining our own outputs, we will use the system's response, which is displayed under response details. By default, we can see that the response format is set to JSON. For this example, we want the response format to return a PNG image instead of JSON, so to make this change, we will need to update the logic flow. In the logic flow, we are going to add a set text block. I've just gone ahead and renamed our set text block to set output type. Under the from field, we will put a text block with the value of image.png. So I'm just going to type that in here and a text string should appear with that value. In the to field, we will set the value to the response content type. Let's run this logic flow in isolation to confirm that the changes have been applied successfully. If everything has worked correctly, we should now see that the response format has been changed to PNG from JSON. In this step, we'll generate the QR code. It's important to note that in Comnoco, files are stored as base 64 strings, allowing us to store images as text. Now, let's begin by adding another set text block to the logic flow and naming it generate QR. Next, we will go to the output section and create a new text string called QR, which we will link to the to field in the set text block we have just created. For the from field, we will just type in QR, which will give us a block that generates a QR code. We will now need to generate that QR code. So to test this, we need to assign it a value. So I'm just going to type in hello as a simple example. When we run this entire function, the output we receive should be a base 64 string, which looks like a series of letters and numbers. And this is just the QR code in text format. Now let's test the entire API function to see what we've built so far. So first we need to create a trigger for this function. We are going to select the post method. And for the trigger authentication, we are going to choose no authentication and just keep it public. We are then going to publish our workspace to see what we have created so far. Now let's take an overview of the API specifications for the function we have just published. Here we can see important details like the API endpoint, specifically the post URL. This is the URL where our QR code will be sent. Now, why have we followed the specific process by structuring it this way? We've not only tested the functionality of our API, but we've also obtained the critical post URL that our QR code will link to. So now I'm going to copy this to my clipboard and head back to the API function to continue editing. Now we will create an internal variable to store our base URL. This will be a text string called base URL, which will hold the value of the post URL we just retrieved from the published trigger. For simplicity, I'll rename our original input QR URL to target URL. This reflects its purpose, indicating where we want users to be redirected. I'll also rename user key to user ID to align with the column in the Superbase table we created earlier. Next, let's update the logic flow. We'll remove the placeholder value of hello that we previously set and replace it with a join text block. In the join text block, we'll combine two elements, the base URL and the user ID. To test this, I'll assign a test value of hello to user ID. After running the logic flow, the output should show a concatenation URL ending with hello, which we can see here. As you can see, I have gone ahead and added in a target URL within this input because this is where I want users to be redirected. However, we need to store this information in the Superbase database so that when the QR code is scanned, it can properly redirect the user. To do this, I'm going to begin by navigating to the logic flow and creating a set data structure. I'm doing this to ensure that the response we get from Superbase is stored correctly. As you can see, I have immediately named my set data structure to keep everything organized. Now I'm going to focus on the from field within this set data structure, and I'm going to add in a Superbase database call. Next, let's focus on the to field. I'm going to begin by navigating up to the variables section and creating a data structure. I'm now going to link this variable we have just created to this to field within our set data structure. Now, if we click on the Superbase database call, we can configure its properties on the right-hand side of the screen. Here, I've selected the database connection we previously created in this video. I've also selected the table name and changed the call method to create. Next, I'm going to click on Build Record Data Structure. As you can see, we now have a dynamic representation On the tree of in Superbase, certain fields like ID and created at are automatically managed, so I am going to remove them from this tree. That leaves us with user ID and target URL. And since we named our inputs the same as these fields, we can simply replace these placeholders on the tree with the corresponding inputs. Before we proceed, it's important to address one critical detail. In Superbase, the user ID field is defined as an integer 8 type, and since our value of hello is a string, it won't work. So we need to ensure we change this to a number before continuing. To ensure that everything has worked, you can go ahead and run your entire set data structure. This is the result that you should have. You should be able to see a 201 created status code, meaning that it has worked. And this should be displayed in your table within your Superbase database. I have just gone ahead and created another API function named retrieve and redirect. This will be a GET request on our API. Since we'll be passing the user ID as part of the URL path, I'm going to go ahead and create an input called user ID and set its parameter source to path. Now that I've done that, I'm going to set its test value to 111. I have just gone ahead and created a set data structure within the logic flow and linked it to the Superbase response internal variable. We have done the exact same process in our previous function. However, this one will be handled differently as we are no longer creating, but we are retrieving. But let's configure its properties. I'm going to click on the Superbase database call and expand my screen here. I'm going to select the database connection we previously created as well as our table name. As you can see here, the call method is set to retrieve, which is exactly what we want. I'm going to build the query now. In this query builder, I'm going to keep the select field set to the star, as this ensures that the query will return all columns from the matched records, which are these four listed below. For the where clause, I am going to add a condition as we only want to return rows where the user ID equals 111, which is our test value for now. Once this condition is set, I am going to click apply to save this query configuration. Now that the query is configured, I'll run the set data structure in isolation to ensure it correctly retrieves records from our database. If everything is set up correctly, the Superbase response variable should contain the matching records, including the target URL associated with the user ID 111. Now, I already know that there are two records in my table, which is displayed here through 0 and 1, remembering that the index begins at 0 and not 1. It's worth mentioning that in this setup, we may see repeated occurrences of the same user ID in the table. This has happened because we've kept the logic flow simple for this demonstration. However, this is something that can be refined and built upon further in the logic flow to manage unique entries or handle more complex scenarios. The next step would be to adjust the query builder configuration to dynamically use the user ID value coming in as an input. So first I'm going to click on the Superbase database call and click on this arrow right here. Going to select query builder structure, which is going to display the configuration on the tree. This shows us the where clause, which is currently set to user ID equals 111. We need to change this to match the value of the user ID coming in dynamically. So we're going to click on the plus button and click on user ID. Now I've just gone ahead and run this data structure to see what has been created. So as we can see, there's the operator, the user ID, and the value. Both the user ID and the value are set to 111. And this duplication is not what we want. Our query only needs one field and we want it to be called value. So to fix this, I'm going to click on user ID. Scroll down on the properties section and click on this button right here to set a dynamic name. I'm going to name this field value, and then I'm going to go back to this original value and delete it. Now I'm just going to run this data structure once again to ensure that it has worked and we only see the value and operator fields. If we take a look at the response details, we can see that the default status code is set to 200. However, since we are implementing a redirect, we need to use the status code 302 to inform the browser to do that. To do this, I'm going to navigate back to the logic flow and I'm going to add a set number block. I'm going to link this to field to the response status code, which should be under output parameters. And then the from field, I'm just going to type in 302. Now, if we run this in isolation, the response status code in response details should change. There we go. Now that we know that this has worked, we can move on to the next step, which is to update the response header. As you can see, I've just gone ahead and added a add item to object block. For the item to add field, I am going to include the target URL. And then we will be adding it to response headers. And I'm going to call it location. And now we're basically finished. So I have already gone ahead and published my workspace. And as you can see, we now have two trigger endpoints, post and get. I'm going to click on this post one to test it. And I'm going to scroll down, click on test request. I'm now going to fill out these two inputs. So let's run this together to see what we get. As you can see, we now have a QR code generated for us. And if you scan this, it should take you to the BBC Sport page. I have just gone ahead and tested this on my phone and I can confirm that it does work. So that is it for this demo. Thank you all for watching. I hope you found this helpful and we'll see you in the next one.